It'll come to that piece of wood. Maybe they even stop, let the bait float up, and then they start to retrieve again. It's not the way to generate a reaction bite. What you want to do is have that bait wiggling, diving, and it's going to come in, and you don't even slow down. Maybe you raise the rod tip up to try to alleviate the chance of it catching across that, but you want to bring that bait down, and you want it to hit that piece of wood, and you want it to kind of go crazy off the other side of it and keep trucking. Everybody, welcome back to the technique of the month here on the channel, and talking about September fishing. You know, I think last year, I believe it was, we talked about fishing up the river, and that certainly is a place, you know, I'd love to be this particular month. You know, but not every fishery you go to is going to have that option. You know, some fisheries don't have much of a river system coming in, or you know, it's just a really small, or there's certainly not every fish in the lake that goes up the river. You know, so there's other fish to be caught, I guess, if we have to, if you have to do that. But I do certainly love to fish up a river in the month of September. On the pick two more, talked about the two baits, and I really want to kind of show you, or you know, talk about the type of places where I expect to be fishing those this month. One thing, you know, that happens around here in East Tennessee in September, and I see it other places across the country, and some of it is annually driven. It's going to happen that way every year, which is what happens here in East Tennessee, is that the lake levels start to fall. You know, here it's a wintertime drawdown. It starts that time of year. Other places it may just be due to dry weather. You know, typically don't have as much rain in July, August, September, you know, in a lot of the country. So your lake levels may be falling because of that a little bit. And that, you know, that eliminates some things, but it also opens up some opportunities, you know, if you want to look at it, try to look at it in a positive way, which is what you want to do out there fishing this month. So the first thing that I think of in September is trying to find a place that's got, if I can find any place that's got water coming in, that's going to be a huge key. Water temperature difference isn't quite as big a deal now as it was in July or especially August. You know, if I can find a place that's 3, 4, 5 degrees cooler in August, that seems like it's more of a deal now, or more of a deal then than it is in September. Usually by September, we've had a couple cooler spells, and maybe the water temperature is starting to drop a little bit everywhere. So your shallow areas are naturally going to be a little bit cooler than, you know, the main body of the lake anyway. So you're not quite as keyed in on, you know, getting as far back in the very back end of a creek always in September as you would be a little bit earlier, like you are in August. But the big thing for me that I like to find is I like to find a flat that's got isolated pieces of wood. And I know we've talked about fishing those isolated targets some before, and that's a big deal in September. So if you've got a place, you know, the lake you're on, the water levels fell a foot, 2 foot, 5 foot, whatever, you've eliminated a lot of that shallow shoreline cover, hopefully at that point. Maybe you've got a few docks left in the water. But if you get back in those flats and you've just got one lay down over here and a stump over there, and you know, just those few isolated pieces of cover, fish will of course roam in between them, but you've got those key targets that are going to be magnets for bass. And a big thing for me this time of year, I truly don't catch a ton of fish on slow moving baits. It's more about a reaction bite, and you know, being able to trigger that fish into biting, because just generally speaking, they're not feeding a lot this time of the year. So having a bait that I can throw beyond the piece of cover, I can reel into the piece of cover, and I can bring across the piece of cover at a pretty high rate of speed is going to help me generate those reaction bites out of those fish. So a squarebill crankbait is one that does that really, really well. You know, a squarebill that's designed properly, you should be able to throw out there past a piece of wood and steadily reel that bait into it, and that bill deflect off of it and come right across it. You know, if it's a really gnarly piece, you may have to slow down, raise your rod tip up, that type of stuff. But generally speaking, with the square bill, you should be able to cross those limbs and stuff without ever stopping the retrieve. And that's a place that I think a lot of people mess up when they're fishing a square bill crankbait, trying to get a reaction bite. You know, you can feel that line leading up to that piece of cover. The bait's diving down. this is the limb, the bait's diving down, well, then your line is across it. You can kind of feel that resistance as the bait's here, and then it starts to climb up to that piece of wood. A lot of people will feel that resistance and slow their retrieve down. The bait will ease up. It'll come to that piece of wood. Maybe they even stop, let the bait float up, and then they start to retrieve again. It's not the way to generate a reaction bite. What you want to do is have that bait wiggling, diving, and it's going to come in, and you don't even slow down. Maybe you raise the rod tip up to try to alleviate the chance of it catching across that, but you want to bring that bait down, and you want it to hit that piece of wood, and you want it to kind of go crazy off the other side of it and keep trucking. That bait doing that is what's going to get a reaction bite way more so than it coming down kind of quick, stopping, hanging, easing across the piece of cover, and then slowly moving off. That speed is what's going to get that reaction bite. So when you're fishing that OG Rocco this time of the year, bouncing across that wood cover, bring that bait into that piece of cover, and only stop if you feel like you're truly about to get hung up. You know, if you feel that bait really wedge up for a second, you know, try to get it loose quickly, and then immediately begin that, you know, that higher speed retrieve to try to get that reaction bite. So that's a big deal with it. My cranking setup, basically the same as what I use on so many different crankbaits. That's the Bass Pro cranking stick, 7-foot medium heavy action, a Johnny Morse Platinum reel, 6:8 to 1 gear ratio, and then 14-pound XPS fluorocarbon line. Do the bulk of my cranking with this setup, especially shallow stuff. Just a absolute workhorse of a setup for me. And then the other one, the little tiny buzzbait, you know, that little 1/8 ounce buzzbait, kind of the same deal. So, you know, obviously it being a buzzbait, if you stop reeling, what's it going to do? It's going to sink. You know, it's not like a walking bait or not like a popper or plopper or anything like that to where it's going to float. You stop that buzzbait, it's going to the bottom. And that just inherently makes people fish it at a constant speed. You know, maybe give it a little bit of interruptions here or there, but you never stop a buzzbait. That makes it good this time of the year, just like with that crankbait, because that bait steadily moving is what's going to generate those reaction bites. So same type of stuff. I really like those isolated pieces of wood and making repeated casts with both of these baits. A lot of times it's all about that repeated cast across that piece of cover, into that piece of cover to get those fish to bite. But throwing that little buzz bait, you know, down one side, down the other side, across it, anything like that, and man, a pretty steady retrieve. With that little Bass Pro Speed Shad on there, it gives it a little bit of lift, but I want to make sure that it's up fast enough that that blade is up, churning, doing its thing. It's throwing water around, and you know, that it's making as much commotion as this little dude can. So again, steady, fairly quick, reaction bite. Keep that in mind, and that's going to help you get more bites this time of the year. For the setup, that's not something you see a lot. I'm going to say is a buzzbait on a spinning rod, but because of that little 1/8 ounce head, man, it just makes it fish really well. And it's a Johnny Morse Platinum 7-1 medium action spinning rod. Of course, a platinum spinning reel on there, size 30. But then I always use, regardless of what I'm doing, I always use 10-pound test Bass Pro braided line for my main line. But then I will up the leader size on this. I never use less than 12 when I'm fishing that little buzzbait, because I am going to be fishing around heavy cover. And to be honest, it's really hard to break 12-pound test on a spinning rod. I'm not going to say you can't, but it's really, really hard to do it. I've caught some big fish in some extreme situations with that 12-pound test fluorocarbon leader and not had any issues with it. So you could go up to 14, but I like it on that spinning rod setup. It's so efficient, and I'm able to, you know, make a big long cast if I want to. But with that braided line, I'm going to get the hook in them, and that 12-pound leader, I don't have to worry about it even if they're in heavy cover. So, man, shallow flats, isolated cover. And repeated cast. You know, if you get around a place that looks fishy, it's for good reason, and just keep making those repeated casts of those pieces of cover this month, and that's going to be the way to generate bites. And you always keep in mind, you truly can't fish too shallow in September. I've caught so many bass, honest to goodness, and water that deep this time of the year. I think between the oxygen levels being a little bit lower still, you've got a little bit of you know, the water level falling. The bait fish are extremely shallow. The shad, bluegill, A lot of that stuff is up there in really, really shallow water. And this deep is a very good depth to fish in September. So if you can find just a little bit of cover, really shallow water, make a bunch of casts at it with those two baits, you'll probably catch some bass.